Hello everyone, welcome to the session. In this session, we are going to discuss about few important things related to URL, Uniform Resource Locator, what is URL, URL components, URL structure, client and server interaction when we hit any URL. URL is very common term when we talk about websites. What is URL? URL is a unique identifier which is used to locate a resource on the internet. It is also known as website address. There is a term I mentioned here, the resource. So what is resource? Resource could be any information in any form. For example, it could be image, it could be your PDF, it could be audio, it could be video, or it could be any document, PDF or text file, HTML doc. So any information in any form that we consider as a resource. Now let's see the components of URL. URL can have protocol, or it is also known as scheme. It can have domain name, or we also call it host name. It can have port number. It can have path. URL can have query parameter. It can have fragment. We also call it anchor. What is fragment? Fragment is used to point to the location on the HTML document. So in the fragment, we give the fragment ID. It could be the ID of any div, or it could be ID of any anchor tag. Whenever we load the URL with fragment, your page would scroll to that tag of the HTML having that fragment ID. So the tag could be any div, or it could be any anchor tag. So on the top of the page, you would see that tag which is having that fragment ID. Fragment does not get or retrieve anything from the server. It only points to the particular tag on the HTML page. So that is the use of the fragment. These are the components of any URL. Complex URL can have all these parameters, all 6 parameters. The simple URL can have few parameters out of these parameters that we would see in the coming slide. Now let's see the URL structure. URL structure means how the URL components are arranged to form the URL. At the first position in the URL, it would be the protocol or scheme. You can write here scheme. Then it would be a colon, double slash, domain name, domain, or we can call it host name, colon, the port, slash, path. After path, it would be query parameter. Query parameter starts with question mark. Here you can write query parameter. After query parameter, it would be fragment or anchor. Fragment starts with hash. So this is the structure of the URL. Now let's see few example of URL to make it more clear. To find a few examples of the URL, let's go to the browser. Here I have searched Amazon, and let's click on this. So let's copy. So this is one of the URL. Let's copy this. This is the simple URL. What it is having? It is having HTTPS, which is the scheme. We discussed the URL structure, then colon, then double slash, and this. So this is the domain name here, and there is no port number present. and this is the path. Slash is the path. Regarding port number, if there is no port number present in the URL, then the default port of the scheme is used. So the default port for HTTPS is 443. Let's see one more URL. So let's click any of the link. Let's click on this mobiles. So after clicking on mobiles, we have got this URL. So let's copy this. So here what we have, this HTTPS, the domain, then slash. So this is the path till here. This is called path, which we discussed here in the URL structure. Again, the port is not present, which would be 443 by default. So, and from here to here, it would be path. Then this question mark means this is the query parameter. So from here to here. So this is the query parameter. How many query parameters? 1, 2, 3. 3 query parameters. 1, 2, and 3. And this ampersand is used to separate the query parameter. This is one query parameter. The first, before equal it is key, and after equal it is value. So this is in the key and pair. Let's see one more URL. Let's click on any of this. Let's click on this. Let's copy this. You can see this is a bit lengthy URL. So from here to here, the same scheme, the domain, then from here to here, it is the path, then from here the query parameter starts from here to here. So you can have any number of query parameter. How the URL with port number looks like, let's create one dummy URL. Test.com colon 900 plus record id equal to 1. So the URL with port number would look like this here. You can see I have used port number now 9000. Let's create one dummy URL with the fragment. Let's take the previous example. Copy this and put the hash. And after hash, you need to give the fragment ID. So let's take the fragment ID as print this. How the fragment would work? So this fragment ID is not sent with the HTTP request to the server. This is the URL which would load the resource from the server. After resource is received from the server, this fragment ID is used to point to the tag of the HTML received by this URL, and that tag should having the ID as this print. So this is the use of fragment. So now let's see how the client and server interacts when we hit the URL. So under this topic we will see use of port number and URL without port number, use of IP address, use inspect mode of browser to check the request parameter which browser sends to the server, and also see the response. We are hitting this URL www.amazon.it from browser. Suppose this is the Amazon server. This is the server. I am talking about the physical server. It could be a VM as well, virtual machine. So this is representing the Amazon server, and inside this server the website is running. Where website runs? In the web server. So this is the web server where the website is running. This virtual machine or physical machine will have some IP address. On this IP address, the browser would send the request, and this web server always runs on some TCP port. This is your port, and this port is also used by the browser to send the request on this particular port. When we hit this www.amazon.in, the request would be going to this web server. So to reach this web server, what we need IP address and the port number. The IP address would help us to reach to this machine, and then port number would help us to reach to the website server. Also, this web server would able to understand particular protocol only. Widely used protocol which can be understood by the web server is the HTTP. So it is important to use the same protocol which can be understood by the web server. Once we reach to the web server using the port number, IP address along with the scheme, web server should know which resource you need. So there should be some path of the resource. Use the path. So to get the resource or the information from the web server, what we need at least four things. First is the scheme, then the IP, then port number, and then path. Once we have all these four information, we can talk to web server. We means any client. It could be browser or any API client can talk to web server to get the resource. A resource could be any image or any document which we already discussed. In this URL, the https://www.amazon.in, as per the structure of the URL, what we have scheme, and then we have the domain name. Only two things we can see in the URL: the scheme https and the domain name www.amazon.in. And after this there is nothing, no port number, no path, and still this URL will fetch the detail from the server if we hit this in the browser. So how? As we discussed, to get the resource from the server we need a scheme which we have in this URL, the IP address which we will get from the domain name, then port number and path. Port number and path are not present in this URL. So what happens if port number is not present in the URL? Browser will use the default port of the scheme. So here the scheme is HTTPS. Default port of this scheme is 443. Just to mention, on this port your web server should be running. Web server should not use any other port. When browser will hit this URL, it will use the port number 443. The default port for HTTP is 80. If you are using the HTTP protocol, then the default port is 80. In this case, browser will use the port number 443. And what about the path? There is no path present in the URL. If there is no path present in the URL, browser use the path as slash, only slash. In actual, the browser would convert this URL like this: https:// www.amazon.in colon 443. This is the scheme. This is the domain name. And this is the port number and slash is the path. From the domain name, using the DNS service, browser will get the IP address. So now we have all four parameters, each all four parameters to get the resource. Now let's hit this URL in the browser. So this is the URL I am hitting. You can see we have got the HTML. So this is the HTML which you are seeing on the screen. We can also inspect what the request HTTP request has been sent by the browser and what the response received by the browser. So you need to right click on the screen and click on the inspect. So this is the inspect mode of the browser. You need to click on the network, clear everything. Let's refresh the page to capture the request again. I have refreshed and you need to check the request www.amazon.in which has been sent to the server. So that should be a document request. You can see the type document. So this is our request. If we inspect this, we can see here whatever we discussed. So what is the request URL? https colon www.amazon.in slash, but we entered the URL without slash at the end. So this is the path has been added by the browser. And in the remote address, you can see the IP address. This is the IP address version 6. So we discussed that the domain name would be converted into IP address using the DNS service. So the browser has already done. And the port number you can see after colon 443. So there is no port number present in the URL. So browser has used the default port number of this scheme. HTTPS, that is 443, which we discussed. So whatever we discussed, we can see here. In the request header, you can also see the path, that is slash. And in this response, we get what server sends to the browser or client. Here we can see the HTML, means server has sent the HTML. So here the resource is HTML. In this way, you can inspect any URL which you want to analyze. Just want to highlight one more thing. This is the practical design of the system. So in actual when you hit any URL, the request first goes to load balancer, then load balancer will redirect that request to the server, web server, and web server will send the response to the load balancer. Load balancer will send the response to the browser, or you can say client. So this is the actual design. So whatever IP address and port number we get from this URL, that would be of load balancer. That would not be of server. The mapping of the IP and the port number of the server would be present at the load balancer side. Client or browser would not know about the server IP address and port. So this is because of the security. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.